I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professor. My background is reserve management, conservation reserve management. Um, I currently support a number of reserves across the country and in Southern Africa on the practical implementation of conservation management. And obviously, drones has been a big subject in the conservation management field over the last few years. Um, we have on various projects tested, tried, failed, and with some limited success used drones in specific applications. And I think my presentation today is going to just highlight some of those. Um, and obviously, when Katie introduced me, do they make our management interfaces more effective and efficient? Well, it really does depend. That's my summary of it. But we'll get into the details in a moment. So if I can just, so if we've obviously today, the previous speakers have highlighted all the use cases, and I think most of us in the industry are very familiar with the use cases that drones have. And essentially, one needs to just remember that these drones are literally just a flying machine that can carry a payload. That payload is either a camera or it's a vessel that can store chemicals in our applications here. If you're a fisherman, you can use it to take your bait out to the backline, but it is essentially just a vehicle to enable you to get an aerial visualization. Um, the expensive part comes in and the details come in on what you want it to do. So there are various different cameras that one can put on there. There are various the size hoppers that one can put on there to accommodate various applications. But as we've discussed, plant mapping and inventories, tree health monitoring using NDVI, multispectral imagery, fire detection, wildfire management, as we discussed, security, anti-theft protocols. Drones are very effective in that. Post-harvest assessments, damage mapping like fires, insects, baboons, as we've discussed. Precision spraying. I would say precision spraying in inverted commas. I know there's been some discussion around spray drift, which I think people really do underestimate. So precision spraying in inverted commas and invasive species control, and then obviously your open area monitoring. I can just give you an example here. These two images below are a project that I'm working on in Mozambique. And you can see these are sand mining, sand harvesting within their forestry with their FMUs. And then obviously a lot of on the photograph on the right is the open areas that are being cultivated by local people. So using a drone to monitor those is very effective. So if I can, I think Richard touched on it earlier. This is a satellite image, okay? And I just think at this juncture, drones are certainly part of one's toolbox when managing anything, conservation areas, plantation areas, etc. But I like to see it as they are a very specific tool. So they're not a shifting spanner that can be used for very many things, okay? It is a specific size spanner that can be used for very specific applications. So this is obviously you can see it's a commercial timber area. This is about 4,000 hectares. Okay, this operation, this organization did have a drone, a fixed wing drone that they used previously to map high resolution imagery of all the areas, but the drone went AWOL and they never found it again. What that meant is that the entire mapping operation came to a grinding halt. They didn't have enough budget to buy another one. So they relied heavily on that one drone to get their imagery, which obviously for a couple of years they didn't. We then started to have a look at the availability of satellite imagery. And in the title of my presentation, it really depends. This is where it comes in, is what questions are you trying to answer? So for us here, satellite imagery at 0.5 meter resolution to 10 meter resolution was high enough resolution to enable us to answer our questions. Okay, so there are many. We won't go into all the details, but there are many platforms where one can get up-to-date satellite imagery. The problem with Google Earth, etc., is the resolution is very good, but the date, the imagery is often very old, a couple of months, and one would need up-to-date imagery. So that's where drones and satellite imagery are very helpful. Is one can get that up-to-date satellite, up-to-date imagery. The problem here is when you're looking at an entire farming unit, is it will take very long using a drone, and the imagery size and the amount of data that one uses to have to store that imagery, and the software that one has to use to stitch all that imagery together to get your ortho mosaic is very expensive and it's time consuming. So satellite imagery does play a role here. What this project was is to have a look at all these open areas, okay, and assess the open areas. This was from a high value conservation area assessment for FSC, okay, and one can then have a look at the NDVI and one can see all these red areas is that there are problems in there. And these red areas in these open areas are showing those potential cultivated areas. Okay, the blue areas are healthy vegetation. The red areas is either bare ground or very low leafed areas. Okay, so that was essentially using this satellite imagery, running NDVI on it, and it'll immediately pick out where those problems are. So that's the broad scale application. Then what one would use, this is where drones come in, is then we went to ground truth all those areas. So this is just using a normal, the bottom photographs here is just using a normal camera. And then obviously we wanted to get a up-to-date, close-end, high-resolution photographs of what's happening on the ground. And here you can see all these open areas that have been cultivated down this valley. Okay, so that's, yes, where drones do have a very specific application with taking those photographs. As Richard alluded to, fixed point monitoring, coming back year after year and taking those photos, and using them, for example, on those crane nests. Satellite imagery can't do that for you, but drone imagery can. So that is where the application is very, very worthwhile. So some of the pros, obviously, we've discussed them earlier today, is it's fast. You can send a drone up. You can get high resolution imagery. If you wanted to do a larger area, the pros sort of start waning and the cons start coming in because you have to take a lot of photographs. There has to be a certain amount of overlap, and you need the expensive software to stitch all those together. Okay, but it's as easy as just putting your drone up and taking some photographs, and it's high resolution, as Richard alluded to earlier with his camera on his drone. It is cost effective versus aircraft surveys, but here comes the depends again. Only for smaller areas. Okay, it is far more cost effective to use an aircraft to fly a 25,000 hectare property than it is to use a drone or multiple drones. And that, I think that is obvious. Obviously, you can use it for early pest or disease detection. Okay, again, on smaller areas. You don't have to wait for satellite imagery, etc., to come out. You can send that drone up straight away and assess your fire damage, assess your hail damage, assess your pest damage. Okay, it's obviously one of the biggest uses in drones currently is your security and theft. Okay, because one is able to immediately put a drone up in the air and follow suspects, or be able to send a drone into a potentially life-threatening situation and not risk human life. Just a very interesting project that's on the go now is in anti-poaching. Obviously, I said to you earlier, I'm involved in the conservation sector, is on anti-poaching operations. They're actually using drones to lead dogs into contact situations. So, obviously you've picked up the trail of rhino poachers or whatever, but it's a dangerous situation to go into. So they stick a drone up, they release the dogs, and the dogs are now trained to follow the drones. The drones have the aerial visual of where the suspects could be, and they follow the drone in. So that's an exciting development there, using drones. As I've mentioned, it's up-to-date imagery. You can get it hot off the press, okay? But the limitations there are the large amounts of data. And then, obviously, we've discussed it today, thanks to SAFI and thanks to organizations like Peace Parks in my industry. There are a lot of organizations that are investing in research and development. Obviously, the problems are that drones are expensive, and the normal user, the farmer, the person with a nature reserve, doesn't have, and we're going to get to the costs in a moment, doesn't have that kind of money to throw at it. So if there weren't organizations investing in this, it would not bring down the cost in the future. So it is positive to see that organizations are experimenting and researching into the use applications of these pieces of technology. So the cons, I've alluded to some of them, and a lot of the speakers have alluded to them earlier. Obviously, the South African civil aviation regulations are, the compliance is an issue, and it is a complex process. When drones first started coming out, South Africa adopted some standards, blanket standards, and they didn't take into consideration the local context that South Africans need to undergo. But it is complex. At one stage, it was actually cheaper and more effective to get a proper pilot's license than to get a drone license. But obviously, these things, the longer they stick around, the more efficient the process would be. You obviously need certified pilots, and that is a massive problem in the industry. At the moment, the supply or the demand exceeds the supply, so there are not a lot of pilots out there. And I have been involved in countless organizations where they have invested in pilots, trained them up, and those pilots have left. And obviously, your entire drone operation comes to a grinding halt. You've invested in these machines, but now you've got nobody to fly them because they've just jumped ship and gone somewhere else where they obviously become more marketable now because they've got a pilot's license and they're hot property. So that is a problem in the area. Obviously, that should get better with more pilots being out there, but it is a problem where we currently are. As I've alluded to, only small areas and very specific use applications at the moment using drones. It's very, very difficult to go and survey a 5,000-6,000 hectare property using a drone. Obviously, weather, terrain, and battery are the biggest limitations. If you, for example, on game counts, we've tried to use drones on game counts. You've got to count in a very specific period of time because the animals move, so you don't want to count them again. Terrain is an issue. It's very difficult for these things to fly in rugged terrain, and then obviously battery life. If you're trying to do a game count on a 10,000, 20,000 hectare property, batteries are a problem. But again, these are all improving. I'm just talking about what is currently out there. We've mentioned the data processing workload. If you go and try and do an orthomosaic photograph of a property of 1,000 hectares, you're going to have probably over 1,000 pictures, high resolution pictures that one has to stitch together. So that needs space. These drones are expensive. We're not talking about just Mavics and Phantom 4 Pros and things like that cost 25,000-30,000 rand. These are over 100,000 rand up to 1 million rands worth of drones, so they're very, very expensive. At the moment, the industry is very reliant on service providers. Okay, and the problem there is in a lot of the projects that I've worked at, for example, spraying operations. The drone pilot with his drone will come in and do some spraying, and there will be a technical problem with the drone. He'll crash the drone, or something may happen, and he doesn't have any backup. And you are wanting to continue with your spraying operations, and the drone contractor that you're using just doesn't have spares, which delays the entire process. So that is a massive problem at the moment, and it has happened time and time again where you go to a place and you say, have we finished spraying? And it's like, no, the drone pilot is waiting to have his drone fixed. He can't find another one. So that is a problem. And then the biggest issue at the moment is, besides the small home use drones that one can pick up anywhere, the bigger drones that can cover bigger areas and carry heavier payloads, are not accessible to your normal land user. Yes, for the SAPIs and the Mondis, and I'm sure you will know that it is even that is very difficult to get authorization to spend money and invest in those projects. But for a normal farmer who maybe has 3,000, 4,000 hectares of timber, for him to go out and invest in a pilot and invest in a drone, it's just not accessible at the moment. Yeah, so those are the issues there. Again, with our game counts using drones, the cameras are not, the thermal cameras and all of that one uses, they are just not the high enough resolution to be able to distinguish between, is that a wildebeest or is that a zebra, for example. So at the moment, we ran a comparative study last year, flying a drone next to a helicopter. And by far, this is over, I think, a 16,000 hectare reserve in Zululand, and the helicopter outperformed the drone. It's thick bush too, so a drone can't see into the bushes. So a helicopter can descend, chase animals out of the bush, count them, and then carry on. All the providers that we've got quotes from and proposals from, all their use cases are in open areas, in the Kalahari, in the Karoo, in grassland areas where, yes, a drone is far more effective, just because of the terrain and just because of the vegetation structure. So again, it really does depend on what questions you want answered. So just, it's also notoriously difficult to get actual prices out of people. But as far as I've been able to find out, these are very general figures. So this is what we're looking at the moment. So for the sprayers, you look at almost 200,000 Rand for a drone. It's and then training is from 40,000 to 100,000. So you can just see the point I'm trying to get across here is it is expensive. And for a big multinational, you can probably justify it. But for a normal run-of-the-mill farmer, they're not going to do that. Obviously, as things progress and as technology becomes cheaper and more accessible, those prices will come down. I think we can all remember back to the day where laptops were first introduced and cell phones were first introduced. It was only the higher income generators that were able to afford those, and now everybody's got a laptop, everybody's got a cell phone, and that is now no doubt going to be the case with drones. So I'm certainly not saying that, no, they aren't practical at the moment. They have very specific use cases. And I really do believe the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to make them more accessible to us. Thanks to organizations that are, as I mentioned earlier, are testing and trialing out things. So yeah, this at the bottom here, this image I just wanted to show you, this is in the Kalahari in the Northern Cape. And you can quite clearly see this burn scar along here. This burn scar, it's amazing, and the Kalahari is visible 4 years later. So this is where a drone is very useful, where you can just pop it up and go and have a look at the landscape. You don't have to rely on satellite imagery and pay huge costs there. And this is taken with a fairly cheap Phantom 4 drone. So just to finish off on the estimated cost, so the entry and mid-range mapping drone is anywhere between 100,000 and 200,000 Rand. These are fixed wing, generally fixed wing drones where they need to fly long distances, cover big areas. So your quadcopter type drones are not efficient in that way. The fixed wing drones are more efficient. So if you're wanting to map areas 4,000 or 5,000 hectares at a time, that's the cost you're looking for. Obviously, the advanced LiDAR RTK drones, 600,000 to 1.2 million. And then your training and civil aviation compliance, 40,000 to 100,000, as I alluded to earlier. And then, again, this is a very ballpark figure, just because it's so hard to get costs out of people. But contractor, if you're going to hire a contractor in, let's just say for a 3 to 6 month project, it's going to cost you anywhere between 300 to 500,000 Rand. Okay. And again, those are with big asterisks next to them. Some may be a lot cheaper, but it really does depend on what kind of projects those are that you require them. Okay. In the image below, for those of you interested, this is obviously firewood harvesting in that Mozambique project that I'm doing. And one is able to pick up these via looking at aerial footage and then coming into the ground and then having a look at ground truthing on the ground. But all these miombo trees are chopped and then taken out for firewood and charcoal manufacturing, which we're here. Drones play a vital role in policing that, and being more efficient in that. So the way forward, just to conclude, is I think you need to ask yourself, what is it that you need to accomplish? Can you get the same or very similar answers using satellite imagery, Google Earth imagery, using a very cheap drone that you can buy off Temu, for example? That's what you need to first ask yourself. A lot of the time in conservation, for example, people are saying they want high resolution imagery, and often it's just bush that you're looking at, and you have a nice base map that you hang up in your office or you have on your computer on your GIS projects. But there's a huge cost to get that. But you didn't really need 50 centimeter resolution. You could have easily done it with 2 meter resolution, for example. Obviously, you need to do a cost-benefit analysis, determine the most efficient and cost-effective way of achieving what it is you want to accomplish. Okay, like I said, consider satellite imagery, sentinel imagery. There's a lot of imagery out there, and organizations that provide far more cost-effective, high-resolution imagery for larger areas. Obviously, if you're monitoring an erosion site, or you're monitoring crown crane or wattle crane nests, or a very specific burn area, yes, drone imagery would be better. But if you're monitoring now on large scale, consider the alternatives. I think the big pitfall that especially the younger generation fall into is this uber and over reliance on technology. I can sit in an office and I can everything will be taken care of because we've got cameras out there, we've got sensors out there, we've got networks out there. And we are fine. I really think we still need to get off our chairs, get into our vehicles, and get into the field, okay, and observe and monitor there. Drones, satellite imagery, remote sensing is a tool in the toolbox, but we still need to get out into the field, okay. Technology and service providers are expensive and often unreliable, as I said earlier, and this is no slate at them if there are some of them on the webinar at the moment. But I'm saying for the general man in the street, he's got a farm and he wants to make use of drone providers, they are expensive. And as often is the case, we've run into problems when they are small scale and they don't have a fleet of 10 or 15 drones that they can call on should there be a problem. However, as I've said numerous times, technology is advancing rapidly, okay, which should bring costs down and make it more efficient and accessible to general users. Okay, so drones do have a place in ecological management, but to date, these are very specific and they're often more effective and efficient and effective ways of achieving similar results. Okay, so we must just bear that in mind.